Alright, here we are. Another Bookwave video on the Dialogues of Socrates. Today we're looking at Charmides. So, Will, what are
Hmm.
your first impressions? What are your first thoughts?
Uh, I'm a little mind bent about the whole experience, quite frankly. As the chapter discusses temperance, and I feel that in reading the chapter, I am being temperate. As it explores what temperance is, I feel less tempered. It is, well, first of all, I've never read anything really about Greek knowledge, I'll call it. And so it was something I was very excited to get into because, of course, they did so much for philosophy and exploration of what it means to be human. And
Of
so
course, they call Plato the father of Western philosophy, so...
you'd think that to understand the whole, you'd have to dissect the root. And in dissecting the root, let me tell you, my hands are dirty. Oh, what's your take on it? Honestly, I'm still like, I've just finished reading it and I'm a bit baffled by the whole experience because, of course, they're talking about temperance, and as we know temperance, it talks about self-restraint, but at the beginning they talk more about a quickness and an efficiency of doing what it is you know to be doing. And it's certainly in reading it not doing what I know that I could be doing and that I have knowledge of and ought to be doing, but that I'm simply exercising my will of self-development at that point. And it's just got me spinning.
Yeah, I hear ya. Like, the first definition that Charmides offers of temperance itself is quietness, and Socrates just kind of uses that as like a... He doesn't exactly say that that has nothing to do with temperance, but rather he says, how could that be a source of temperance when it's not as good as quickness? Which doesn't really seem to be all that consistent, but he makes a decent point of it anyway.
Well, and certainly, like, it's more and less about the actual content because really the dialogues of Socrates, you see the Socratic method of quibbling, and I think quibbling is the perfect word for it because there's a lot of fallacious arguments, and his ability to ramble to no end is really quite well illustrated. And as you get into argument discussion and fallacious arguments and the whole false dichotomy and slippery slope, things of that nature, you can see just how pointless some of the things they're discussing end up being, especially when because I'm fixated on the last half as that's what I've just finished, but the quibbling between Critias and Socrates were just almost mind-numbing.
Yeah, a lot of the dialogues are just kind of arguing about schematics. Like, I've read the Republic before, and
Mm-hmm.
earlier in Charmides it mentions that Charmides is the son of Glaucon, who happens to be one of the main players in Plato's Republic.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, like, the Republic is presented a bit differently, where it kind of shows Socrates as an almighty knowing figure, and everything that anybody brings up to Socrates in the Republic, he's able to just easily dismiss it. And Charmides is formatted quite a bit different in that respect, where
It was
Socrates seems to be the one who doesn't really know what he's talking about, just kind of working through the ideas at the same rate or even slower than the others.
Yeah, and it's kind of nice though, as the reader, to be able to experience that just shameless, uninhibited exploration of the concept in search of the truth. And I think he's very humble in that respect. It's certainly in Charmides. And also, I would just like to disclaim that I have no idea how to pronounce any of these names. As I mentioned, I haven't studied this, and so if I'm butchering all of these names and words, I apologize. But back to the point, it's nice, to be able to almost walk with Socrates through this sort of train of thought and witness the dissection and hopefully building of a stable point. And I think the stable point is that temperance is knowing what you're good at and abstaining from doing those things that inhibit you and lead to disadvantageous positions. And I think that whole sentence is pretty freaking flamboyant, and it's hard to really know and ascertain what is good and what is evil, but it's certainly the attempt to understand and refrain from evil things and do good work.
Yeah, and some of the later definitions that they come up with, one of them is self-knowledge, and towards the end they consider it to be the knowledge of good and evil for a little while.
Yeah.
Which is, I don't know, both of them have their place in temperance itself, but every definition that they offer seems to miss the mark a little bit, but also all of them are really integral parts of what temperance is considered to be.
And how would you define temperance?
That's a good question. After
Thank you.
after reading Charmides, I'm a little less sure of how to define temperance.
I think that's a great definition. Honestly, like when you, not even to be cynical, like temperance is so very subjective, or perhaps it is objective. I don't really know. I'm still exploring all of these notions of philosophy, as I didn't explore them in my youth. I certainly didn't explore them in high school or university. University became very one-tracked in my specialization. There isn't any sort of Victorian exploration of what it means to be temperate anymore in these institutions. And so it really is up to me to just start reading and deciding what to read and understand and what lessons to take with me. And I think, like, before reading it, I would have said temperance is not reacting to someone's reaction and assessing a situation wholly and uninhibitedly to say, in spite of my emotions, what actions must I take to produce an advantageous result for all parties ecologically and wholesomely, I suppose. And now I question that entire definition, because when you change the scale of impact and timeline of events, you have to ask yourself, well, how do I know that that is a good thing, and how do I know that that is an evil thing? Like, it is impossible to know itself what is advantageous. When you look at events on a global scale, on a long timeline, you can look at a bad thing that triggers a whole series of good things, and you can look at a good thing that triggers a whole series of bad things. And that's where I say it's subjective and objective and wholly impossible to understand.
Yeah. And there's so many dimensions to it too, because if you just define temperance as self-restraint, then you're lacking the knowledge aspect of it. Like, how do I know what to restrain myself from? So you kind of have to have aspects of self-knowledge, like when they talk about the Oracle of Delphi, and they talk about the line, know yourself. I think that is a really important aspect of it, but you also need to have a certain knowledge of good and evil to fully be temperate in your actions. Because you could say that temperance is just doing good actions, or being modest, or being quiet, but you really need to know what to do with it before you can act out temperance.
Yeah, and like especially for myself, like in my own life experience, my path that I've been on, I've definitely been non-temperate. Like I drank a lot and smoked a lot, and I think until I did those things, I didn't know that they were bad. And knowing and having experienced all the goods and bads of my short existence, it has given me the ability to know myself. And without having done things that I can reflect on, I couldn't conceive of how to determine what to do next. And I think the idea of temperance is really a learned trait. Like, I don't think you can just share temperance with someone and say, okay, you now know what temperance is, because until you go out and experience what works and what matters to learn who you are and to know thyself, like you said, it's almost
That's a good point.
unquantifiable.
That's a good point because the whole book is based on, like, the whole action is brought about by whether or not Socrates is going to give Charmides a charm, and he has to know if he's temperate in his actions or not. But being temperate isn't just an on-off switch, it's more like a progress bar. You can't be or not be temperate. You have to work on your temperance and act it out.
And that isn't to say that you can't know that certain things aren't good or bad. Like, obviously, there are certain things that we can allow ourselves to trust in the science of others and the knowledge of others, but to get a wholly rounded experience where you can say, okay, I'm not going to smoke cigarettes and eat hamburgers every day, like that's a great place to start. But I think temperance is much bigger and much smaller than just simply abstaining and restraining yourself from doing those things that you know aren't good. Because if you lived a life unobserved your whole life, that's full on restraint, but that isn't good. It's evil in of itself, because now you haven't produced. And they get into the whole, what is the distinction between doing and making and working? And is working good and wise and knowledgeable, or is making good and wise and knowledgeable, or is doing all of those things at once? And again, like, I think you need to go out and try things and see what it is that you like, and what you like reaps the most reward for you, to be able to say, okay, I'm going to dedicate myself to this thing that I've decided is good.
Yeah. I think that might actually be the biggest hole in most of these definitions. If you accept doing your own business as temperance, you're never going to expand your horizons and try to pick up other knowledge of what might be a good or a bad action. You won't get your own self-knowledge if you just stick to just doing your own business. You're not going to gain the knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, you could spend your whole life making shoes when inside you had an inborn talent to cure cancer, and you because you picked up the first thing you were good at and said, okay, this is what I'll do now until I die. I don't know how much, like, there's something to be said about staying in your comfort zone and getting out of your comfort zone and expanding your horizons, like you're saying.
Yeah, it's like a dichotomy.
Yeah.
You could say the same thing about between quietness and quickness that Socrates seems to make a big deal about. The first time I read through that bit, it didn't really make much sense to me, because I was like, well, they're not really opposites. To do something quietly doesn't mean that you can't do it quickly and effectively. But Socrates kind of acts like Charmides said something like, this doesn't make sense because of this, but I don't really see it that way. Perhaps it's more of a translation error.
I don't think so. I think that there's something to be said about the nature in which Socrates, again, I'm going to use the word quibbles, because I don't think he's arguing, because I don't think he really proves his point, but he ends the discussion of the idea and moves quickly into a new point. And I think that there are many things and many aspects of life where you can quickly and quietly go about your business and do good work and not be excited and showy and prideful in it, but that just because you're not doing it loudly, is that his argument? It doesn't mean it's bad. But it goes so quickly. Those first few pages, those first few definitions, it's like Socrates is really steering the ship that he doesn't even know what it's made of, and he's just saying, no, that's not the point, and quickly into a new definition. And it's like the amount of time they spent exploring Critias's points and arguing his points and then conceding that he wasn't sure of himself. It would have been nice to see more of that time spent on Charmides' earlier definitions, because I think there's something to be said about modesty and quietness and humbleness and humility, I should say.
Yeah, I agree.
As opposed to the later things that they go on very liberally to discuss.
Yeah, at the beginning, Socrates kind of presents his arguments like, no, this isn't what temperance is. I actually know what temperance is. And then later on, when he's arguing with Critias, he admits that, I'm just pursuing knowledge just like the rest of you.
Yeah, and he's posturing himself in the beginning, and then very quickly Charmides, just as it's illustrated, he looks at Critias to kind of provoke him and have him take over, and Charmides kind of steps back, and perhaps that speaks to the wisdom of Charmides, that Socrates wasn't really looking to educate him, more so quibble. And that is one of those fallacious argumentative tools that when you look at it from a conversational perspective, I'm not familiar with the exact term. I don't think it's needling, but the look that Charmides gives Critias and the build up to getting Critias provoked is totally a game. Like, that's a play. That's a 5-move play to get Charmides into the backseat of this quibblement.
Yeah, it's like a it's like a political gambit, trying to trap him.
And he did a great job of it. And I think of the three, I'd say that Charmides is temperate.
Yeah.
Because and it's so fun to be able to read a book and then to make a video about the Dialogues of Socrates on Charmides' dialogues. And the notion of temperance, I think, is very untempered, because I'm not doing what I ought to be doing. I'm not making or working. I am, and I'm not. And it's so high level, abstracted, philosophical endeavorment, this whole, now we're having the dialogues of Socrates, but the dialogues of Socrates aren't winning the war, and they're not making the shoes for the soldiers. They're not temperate.
Yeah, I don't really know where to go from there, other than, it's just another dichotomy. Like, you have to read about temperance in order to be temperate, but it's not as useful as just being temperate. But you kind of need to hit the milestones to get the full picture in order to be temperate and practice the virtues.
And again, perhaps I'm so far off the mark again, right? Perhaps the very notion of posting let's say, dissection of the Dialogues of Socrates is temperance, and that this is something that someone will listen to and say, and for the first time they'll be exposed to this notion, and then they'll explore this notion, and with that exploration will come temperance and come wisdom and knowledge, and they'll be able to go forth and say, I understand now that self-restraint and the application of uninhibited action is temperance, and I will do these things not because I thought them to be good, but because I know them to be good, and that I know them to be bad, and that what we're doing now could perhaps be some of the greatest things that we've done in quite a long time.
This all feels very meta.
Oh, it's so meta. It's literally like, meta is the only word for it, and it sounds so pretentious and fake just using the term, but my God, it's like we're 3 degrees away from the point,
And I think it's worth noting that temperance comes from the Greek word sophrosyne, which doesn't really have a very good English translation, because the connotations of sophrosyne are much more than just what we talk about or what we think about when we say temperance.
I'm not familiar with it. Could you expand on it?
When Socrates and Charmides are debating about sophrosyne or temperance, they're actually talking about a term used in the Iliad by Homer.
Right.
It's about King Agamemnon, I'm pretty sure. Something like that in that part. And it's talking about when Agamemnon is behaving with hubris and lacking sophrosyne. And
Okay. If we wanted to go out on a limb, we could even go so far as to say that temperance is not appeasing to the ego, right? And to actually presuppose that there may be a right way to live, and that there are good things to do, and that it is in our nature to know that we know what we need to do. And that, like, if you asked anybody who was feeling stuck in life, what is the one thing that you wish you didn't have to do, but you know that you have to do and you're avoiding most? They already know what they need to do, and that they're not doing it, and that they're beating themselves up over not doing it, and they're feeling like they're not good enough to do it. But that there is this sort of higher self that is talked about in all sorts of scriptures that knows the good way to live, and that's to benefit those people that are collectively around you, and to benefit yourself, and to do good work. And what that looks like is an individual thing that affects the whole.
yeah, absolutely. You're a node in a network, as Jordan Peterson would say.
Exactly. And I think that it's certainly an important time to be discussing stuff like this at a time where people are feeling judged, and not just judged, but like judgmentally shunned for their actions. And there's certain groups that are trying to get us to a place of political correctness that prevents anyone from analyzing anything, and that there are thousands, millions, infinite amounts of ways to live life, but that doesn't mean that they're right, and that there are certain bodies or movements or waves that are trying to push us to this place where we're not allowed to say, hold on, that's hurting you. And we just have to accept people for who they are, and everything is beautiful and everything is perfect, and it's all just free range, random crap, when really we can live in a good way, and there are many ways to live badly, and that temperance is a thing, and temperance does exist, and there is good and there is evil, and that to judge something for what it is objectively isn't judgmental, it isn't damning or something of that nature, but it's just reality that humans judge, and we're judging all the time at a subconscious level, and we know what we don't know, and we know what we know, and when we start to pretend that we don't know what's right, we get into a very dangerous place.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And you could walk that back to just the drinking too much example. Like, at some point, I'm pretty sure we all knew that we were, drunks, but there were too many other factors that just let us continue in our bad behavior. And to be temperance is to just stand up to that bad behavior and say, okay, enough is enough.
Yeah, absolutely. And right now, like, especially in Ontario, I can't speak to the rest of the world, but certainly in North America, there's this consumeristic capitalist engine that is constantly trying to make us feel like we're missing out by not going to the clubs with all of our so-called friends. They're not even friends. They're not even acquaintances. They're just people whose names we know and faces we recognize. And everyone seems to be engaged in some sort of negative behavior. And that if everyone's doing it, perhaps it is good, but that doesn't mean it's good. It just means it's the standard, and the standard may be incredibly wrong. And that perhaps we shouldn't be wasting our money at Walmart and going to the LCBO, Liquor Certification Board of Ontario, to get our alcohol and inebriate ourselves and kill ourselves just to go to work to make the money to do these things. And I think that's a notion that is discussed a lot.
Perhaps one way to look at it is all those people at the club getting smashed, all the people at the LCBO picking up their beer for the weekend. They can all be considered as characters in a story that I'm not participating in. My story has my own set of characters.
Yeah, and that's something that I've decided in the past 4 months of my quarter of a century of a life, decided that I'm going to define for myself. I'm going to get away from the societal norm, and I'm going to say, no, I don't have any friends. I'm deleting Facebook. All of these people make me sick, not physically, but mentally. It's just this, you need to unsubscribe from what the common statement is right now, and that is just do your work, make your money, get your inebriants, get inebriated, feel like crap, and resign yourself to this system. And it's like, well, no, I'd like to do good things.
Yeah, there's just too much rabble out there, and it bogs you down.
But the minute you get on the internet and you get onto Discord, you can find all sorts of lovely people. Like, there's not millions of them. Maybe there is. There's certainly not billions of them, but they are hiding in their rooms on the internet, trying to create a better reality. And as soon as you start looking for them, there's a hand reaching out to grasp, to say, yeah, let's do it. Let's read a book that's really confusing and talk about it and post about it and make something beautiful.
Yeah, and there's so much you can learn from something this old. Like over 2,000 years ago, Plato wrote about a guy named Socrates and all the conversations he had. How long have we waited to pick this up and it still actually makes sense? That blows my fucking mind.
Oh my God, I can't even believe it. Like, you go through history in elementary school and you hear about these notions of Greek society, whispers all around, and you think, oh, that was millennia ago, and there are ancient civilizations that were using stones to feed themselves, and they don't have any notion of reality. And then you actually jump into a book like this and you think, oh my God, how long have we had the answers? What happened to them? Why were they hidden? Why have we been at war for 3,000 years over the soul of the human race, when the answers, the philosophies, were already found? Why are we miserable still if all of these things have been written about?
Because nobody in this era has actually read it. The entire Western civilization was based on, Judeo-Christian values mixed with Greek reason. And how many people in Canada or America have read the whole of the Bible or read anything by the Greeks? Like,
Not
we
many
have
in my community.
we have the foundation. We have everything. Like, we have access to everything, but nobody's actually taking the time to learn it.
I think, I like to blame universities a lot, because I think, and it's not really their fault, I don't blame the professors, but I think over the past 100 or so years, we've gotten to this place where the individual has become so idolized that you can go off and get your learning in the one thing you think you want to do. And there's no mandatory study of these things anymore. You don't go and learn about Greek philosophy when you're trying to become a computer scientist or a psychologist. You simply do that one thing, and you stay in this narrow view of what you think is good and temperate, and you don't learn about those things, and you're not exposed to these realities and these understandings that if we were still exposed to, as universities used to, I'm told, as I've read, this universal education that creates a man and not a cog in a machine, I think that we would have a beautiful society, but that's not really the goal of the current system, to have enlightened individuals that understand their impact on their communities.
Yeah, and I don't know about you, but in high school, I was told a lot that, you're the younger, the newer generation. It's up to you to, put the world in order and, fix all the woes of the world. But you know what we didn't learn? How the world actually works.
Yeah. Absolutely. Like we were, especially for me, it was always since probably grade 1, I would say. By grade 1, I knew that I was meant to go to university and become successful. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what that looked like. I didn't know why university was the answer for it. And I got there and I found out very quickly that it was just something very bizarre and abstract and not really the answer that I was looking for. And that's probably why it didn't stick. But like, if someone had told me, hey, macroeconomics is really interesting at a younger age, I probably would have said, oh, I don't care about that. I'm doing this one thing that I've known my whole life to be the thing that I need to do. And when I went there and got the tools to do it, I was bored with it. I didn't have any passion for it. And now I've studied all sorts of weird, unrelated subjects that I would have never dreamed of studying or enrolling in university. Like the history and the patterns that have been shaping our societies aren't taught to us anymore. I don't even know if they ever were.
Yeah. Like when I listen to certain religious figures, like they have the answer, right? We've abandoned religion, but I don't think it's that simple.
No. And I don't think we'll solve all of the world's problems in one podcast. But I do think that we'll certainly expose certain notions of understanding by discussing them.
Yeah, for sure. Working through our own ideas. That's good enough for me for right now.
Before we go down another rabbit hole, I think we may best call it here. I think that's a good chunk for one chapter of the Dialogues of Socrates to be further inspected.
Yeah, something came into my mind as we were doing this. I don't remember if you said this in one of our previous podcasts or just a regular conversation, but maybe you can describe Temperance as your favorite quote of "Know your limit, play within it."
I think there's something to be said about that. I think absolutely. Like, and also in knowing your limit, you need to experience your limits and find out where they are and hopefully not kill yourself in that exploration.
Yeah, gradually increase your limits to correctly identify them and then use that as your guideline.
Gosh, I love that we quote "Know your limit, play within it." Shout out to OLG.
All right,
All
Will.
right, let's call it here.
I think that's a great place to end it right there.
Yeah. Until next time.
May the force be with you.
And also with you.